Hello, and welcome to this on-demand recording of the latest in our GeoNexus webinar series titled Unlocking the Full Power of the Utility Network, Getting Asset Data and Synchronization Right. In today's webinar, we'll employ our panelist interview format where we'll talk to a panel of industry experts that are out managing utility network projects, and we'll talk to them about managing asset data and synchronization, some of the pitfalls that are there in these utility network projects, and some of the things that can be done to avoid or mitigate certain challenges that exist in the market today. From an agenda perspective, I'll introduce you to our panel in just a second, and then I'd love to do a quick introduction of GeoNexus so that you have a foundation around the tool that gets discussed within this webinar. Next, I'll talk a bit about what we're seeing in terms of state of the UN projects, what's happening in the industry. Then we'll tackle the essential integration questions. I'll have the panel walk through a series of questions and provide answers. And hopefully the goal is that through the panelist experience and insights, you'll find some practical information that you can use in your utility network projects and other integration projects that you might have going on within your industry. All right, so let's introduce you to our panel. I'm Josh Swinson, VP of Revenue Operations for GeoNexus. Very happy to be joined in this webinar by Adam Cox, who's the principal at Iteris Group, by Scott Ewert, who is a GIS solution architect at Iteris Group, and in his career in the recent past and going back many, many years, has served on the utility side. So happy to have the experience of both Adam and Scott and the unique perspective that they both bring to this panel. And I think you'll find the information that they provide in the form of answers to these essential questions very informative, very practical, and very helpful in your projects. And then very happy to have with us Jeremy Wolf, who's the principal at Wolf Consulting. For those of you that are familiar with GeoNexus, Jeremy might be a familiar name and a familiar face. Jeremy was the CTO of GeoNexus for about 12 years. Recently moved on to his own consulting firm where he's managing GIS projects and really focused on kind of the consulting side of things, helping utilities, helping organizations solve some of their GIS issues and working a lot on integration projects. We're very happy that Jeremy hasn't strayed too far from the organization, as we have the opportunity and the privilege to work with him on many projects together between GeoNexus and his new firm. And so happy to have Jeremy here today. All right, a little bit about GeoNexus before we get going. For those of you that are not familiar, GeoNexus is a software company. We've been around for about 16 years at the time of this webinar. And so very excited about that upcoming 16-year anniversary. But we're a software company that's focused on providing integration software. Our goal is to provide an integration platform that does the things that you can see in the slide here, right? Simplifies the configuration of an integration by giving you out-of-the-box tools to connect edge systems such as Esri's GIS and your enterprise asset management system or your customer information system or your outage management system. And it does that by providing out-of-the-box tools, not only to connect the system, but to map the systems and to map the data between the two systems. Secondly, it gives you the ability to easily automate the synchronization of that data, whether you're automating it on the synchronization, scheduling it for a monthly synchronization, for a nightly synchronization, or in some cases providing segmented data so that you can synchronize in near real time. Maybe it's critical data that needs to be updated every 5 minutes. The platform comes with a lot of flexible features that make it really easy to synchronize data and to automate the synchronization of that data. And then lastly, by providing active reporting. The platform provides a nightly readout that you can send out to your team that shows you that the integration is working as intended. And then furthermore, it provides you with issue and error notifications in the midst of day-to-day operations that if something goes sideways with the integration, it not only gives you an error alert or a notification, but allows you to understand exactly what happened. It gives you a level of detail so that you can understand why that error is occurring or why that notification was sent to you so that you can jump in and troubleshoot it, so that you have kind of a jump start on fixing the problem. And we do all this by providing you with a library of connectors in the platform, right? So pre-built connectors to the systems that you can see on this slide that understand the business logic of these systems and again, make it easy to connect, to configure, to synchronize the data between all of these different systems. So that at a high level is what GeoNexus does. One of the things that I'd like to point out is you'll hear some vernacular here. You'll hear GeoNexus referred to as GeoNexus. You'll hear it referred to as the GeoNexus Integration Platform. You might hear the acronym GIP. And then you might hear the terminology GeoWorks Sync, which is our past product. It's still supported product at this point, but it's kind of the 2.0 product to our GIP 3.0 product. So if you hear that terminology throughout today's webinar, we're talking about the GeoNexus software product. And with that, I'll talk a little bit about how GeoNexus works with these utility network projects and how we work with some of our partners. We get a lot of questions about, obviously there are many parts to utility network projects, right? Requirements, the design around the UN, the design around data schemas, working with the workflows and the processes and the design that needs to kind of run the different pieces that are touched by GIS and the move to the UN, data migration integrations, right? Our focus at GeoNexus is really the integration portions of things, whether it's replacing existing integrations that are there as you move to the UN, or one of the use cases that we've really found popular with this move to the UN is setting up GN to UN integrations or synchronizations for those legacy applications that are tied to the GN that you need to keep them working that are not yet supported by the UN. We've done a lot of those integrations between Esri to Esri integrations, and we'll talk more about that later, but giving you the ability to kind of keep everything up and running as you move. And then in the context of our partnerships with groups like Iteris Group and Wolf Consulting and others, we understand that these UN projects are huge, they're lengthy, they're often tied to other projects. And so GeoNexus is not in the midst of all of that, but what we're doing is starting to partner more and more with the groups on the call today, other groups like Ramtech and TRC, to really provide our tool that they can use in kind of the larger implementation, of larger projects, right? They're finding that implementing the tool, implementing GeoNexus, really helps to shrink scope, shrink cost for their end customer. It helps them kind of move the project around with this kind of no-code, low-code approach to just the integration portion, but we help to support them in their larger projects by providing that piece of things. So just a piece on our partnerships with all these groups, and we'll talk more about that probably as we get in. All right, so a poll question today, and hopefully this works better than the SlideShare did originally, but Mara, I'll let you go ahead and launch the poll question that we have. So we'd love to know from all the audience, what stage is your utility network project at today? We have some opinions based on what we see. And we'd love to know where all of you are at, whether you're planning or you're in pilot proof of concept. You're just kind of in the midst of it. You're down the journey. I'm not seeing a lot of completed coming through. And so that's to be expected a bit. But I'll continue on and kind of talk a little bit about the state of the industry as you all fill this out. Just so you know, and I'm assuming maybe the poll is coming through. I can see the poll. What we're seeing right now is there's about 23% of you that are on right now that are in the planning stage or not yet started. 30% that are in that pilot proof of concept. And then another 30% that are in progress underway. They're working towards completion. And then congratulations, 15% completed. So a couple votes for completed. Congratulations to you all. But what you can see here on the slide that I'm showing is that, kind of that top half, the planning or the pilot proof of concept stage is where a lot of people are, right? And that's what we're hearing every day is that utilities are still very early in their migrations, and kind of the ultimate move to the UN. And also what we're hearing is that complexity in asset modeling and synchronization is one of the reasons for slowing down these projects, right? And we do a lot collectively as the panel and as GeoNexus to help solve these problems. And it's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Another thing that we're hearing a lot is that there's a lot of pressure on CIOs and IT leaders and GIS leaders to really deliver business outcomes quickly. I was talking to somebody the other day at a utility in the Northwest, and I said, what does success look like in this project that we're mapping out here and that we're trying to help with as an organization? And he said, we need a quick win. We need it to deliver something impactful for the business, and not just be kind of a planning project at this point. And so hearing that kind of in real life out in the market, for sure. All right, what are some of the common challenges? And I'll bring the panel in to kind of give their 2 cents on this as well. But some of the things that I hear in my conversations on the day-to-day, on the UN side, again, asset data complexity is a big piece of things, right? Handling handling the sub assets and understanding kind of how IDs need to work, and making sure they're consistent across the systems. Same from a schema misalignment perspective, right? Another thing is just integration risk, right? Making sure you're kind of future-proofing things, making sure that the integration strategy that you take doesn't break things as you start to create and do updates and so on and so forth. A big one that I know we have a question about is around cross commodity, right? One of the things that's slowing folks down is it's different if you have multiple utilities you're working with or commodities you're working with. Electric, gas, and water are all different in terms of data and the move to the UN. On the asset management side, fragmented ownership, right? Different opinions on what should be the source of truth, different opinion on where IDs should come from, that sort of things. Blind spots in the different processes and the different workflows. One that we hear a lot is high contractor reliance, right? So, what is the path once a contractor leaves? How are you setting up your system so that you can kind of run it as a utility without the need to go back to this contractor all the time? And then one we'll talk about throughout some of the questions is weak data governance, right? What's the opinion on data governance? And what is the solution on that topic specifically? And I know that there's a question we'll talk about there. So, Adam, maybe I'll go to you first and get your opinion on this list and what resonates most with you.
I mean, the list itself is pretty comprehensive. I think it is a good general statement of things that people need to be concerned about. All of them, though, are overcomable. Obviously, with the right team, the right approach, making sure that you're spending the right amount of time in the requirements and design aspects, you can avoid some of these. The one thing I've seen, though, is that do not underestimate what it will take to address the legacy data problems in the organization. Particularly if you're in an organization that has a lot of evolution in their past, multiple GIS migrations, you may have changed platforms. Maybe you started in Small World and went to Esri. What did that look like? What were the problems coming out of that you need to be taking into account? Because as you try to get as much business benefit as you can from the UN, you're going to have to go back and address those problems. And those are things that a lot of organizations have kicked the can down the road for a long time. I was part of two of those where that specifically was a problem. And it took us a little bit by surprise at how much effort it was going to take to get the data in a state where we could leverage the UN properly.
Awesome. Jeremy, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with all that Adam said. Obviously I focus a lot on integration. So that, at the end of the day, building on what Adam was saying is if you don't clean up your data right before you migrate to the UN, it's just going to make a bigger problem with your alignment. Because a lot of what folks want to do is they've got some sort of integration to their other systems. They want to maintain the integration through the migration to the UN. But data alignment a lot of times is not as high as we'd like it to be, right? It's rarely going to be 100% because things are happening throughout the day. But a lot of times if you're not, in the high 90s percentage-wise, you need to take a step back and say, let's get this right first. Let's clean up the data alignment between the systems and make sure that they're both representing the data the same. Maybe even before you go to the UN, right? Because it's probably not going to be easier when you already have maybe integration. Obviously, GIP makes that a lot easier because you can do the full compare. And, if nothing else, just point out where you've got discrepancies between the systems where you thought you had alignment. But that's, and it's every other system, right? GIS a lot of times now is integrated with 7 other systems, 12 other systems in your environment. And if that data is misaligned, it's not going to get better when you go to the UN, right? It'll still be missing. So I think that's
awesome. Scott, how about you? What sticks out to you from this list?
The data validation. I'm on the same page with Adam and Jeremy. You've got to validate that your GIS system has the same records that you're expecting to sync into your EAM system, Josh. Spent a lot of time trying to reconcile those differences and get that into alignment so that everything can be synchronized and dispatched correctly.
Awesome. Excellent. Thanks for those. Great additions. So why does this matter? And then we'll get into, kind of the bulk of these questions. It matters from the perspective that we started at, right? These projects, they risk becoming just IT exercises if we're not moving to, really business outcomes, right? And that's what we're hearing a lot. And, we understand and have kind of lined this up that, if you can properly address some of the asset identification, the synchronization, and the data governance pieces as you kind of plan this out and implement your UN strategy, it can really unlock those business enablers, right? And make kind of the move to the UN more powerful for your organization. So our hope is that these essential questions, around integration in the UN that we'll go through here will really help, again, provide some practical advice or insights to help as you design, to help as you continue to plan for those that are in that phase, or, rethink some of the places that you're struggling, some of the challenges you're having. And so let's get into those. But before we do, we got another poll question. I'm going to publish the last one just because I don't know if it came up. But Mara, I'll let you go ahead and launch that next poll question. And what we want to know is, what's your biggest concern in moving to the UN? And hopefully, I can publish this a little bit earlier and we can work some of the, the answers from the questions into the different areas that you're concerned about. So again, everybody should see a question there. We're seeing data quality and cleanup coming through. So kind of resonating with the list that we had before. And getting some on schema design. That's getting quite a few votes. Asset ID, synchronization, again, cost, and then executive sponsorship seem to be, kind of on the lower end of answers. So I guess that's a good thing that you have executive buy-in. That's important. But yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll let a couple more answers come in there. But as we move, so keep answering as you will. I want to go into the questions just in the interest of time. We're going to start with some asset data foundations and talk about some questions there. So I'll start with this is one of the key questions that we see. And Scott, maybe I'll start with you on this one. Which system should generate the authoritative asset ID? I know this is a key one, so go for it.
So in previous system setups that I've done, this always seems to be a topic. GIS obviously generates an ID. The EAM system or the system that you're trying to synchronize also has its unique ID. But ultimately, it comes down to where was that data created? And then is it syncing one way? Is it syncing two ways? Is it bidirectional? If it's bidirectional, this becomes a little more complex. So in past experiences, we've always managed to direct ourselves down the key generation route and let GIP generate that key ID. Now that sometimes requires that you add additional schema to both sides of the system, but it keeps everything in synchronization, and you don't duplicate keys. That's what I've done in the past on most implementations, Josh, is set up key gen.
Excellent. Great answer there. Building on that, and maybe I'll go to Adam first on this one. Should asset IDs and key fields be managed system by system? Or do you think there's a better answer for that, Adam?
So historically, the projects I've worked on, we've taken the same approach, letting GIP actually generate the key and create, a landing place in the source and target systems on both sides. There are benefits to that because it does let GIP basically execute as that enterprise generator of the key. I think that as I've gone through now an additional project where we're maybe not using that approach and I'm looking at it from a different perspective as well, I think it goes back to also being able to assess your legacy information. If you have had one predominant system that has been generating the keys where most of your legacy data is coming, like if it's coming from Maximo, and that's always been your source of key generation, and if you had built point-to-point integrations or things in the past, and that was what you were sharing, then allowing one system to still be basically the the enterprise level generator, I think, is still valuable, or is still the viable path, whether it's GIP or one of the other systems. I think when you start getting into trying to exchange keys from an architecture standpoint, it becomes really easy to get yourself in trouble. So I would say my answer is the enterprise level is probably where you want to be. But which system is performing that function, I think, is very subjective to your environment and based on your legacy processes.
Jeremy, you want to build on that at all?
I mean, that's all great. Not a whole lot to add. I would just say, like I said before, a lot of times GIS as an example, but your EAM, a lot of these systems are integrated with lots of other systems, and we continue to add more systems, right? And for various reasons, having an enterprise level key instead of trying to figure out when you add another system, how are those keys getting back and everything else? That's just a nightmare to try to. It's a spider web, right, to try to manage. If you've just got an enterprise identifier that you say that's our strategy. So if you add another 3 systems, it's still just participating in enterprise identifier, and that's the one thing that's shared, to link all the systems together. It'll save you a lot of headache and hopefully heartache.
We don't want heartache or headaches, for sure. For sure. Shifting just a little bit, but still in the same category. And maybe, Jeremy, I'll start with you and let you build here. How should utilities manage asset creation, replacement, retirement across these systems so that the process flow remains intact?
Yeah, so ideally, there are always exceptions. I'll just say that, right? There are always exceptions, and I'm not saying without exception, but ideally, asset creation should primarily happen in one system. For example, assets tracked in both GIS and working asset management are best created in GIS first. Why? Well, it allows the record to be properly connected to other records in the GIS model that aren't tracked in the working asset management system. Example is fittings, right? Your fittings usually don't belong as assets, maybe items, right, on work orders, but not as assets in your asset management system. But they play a critical role in your GIS. So you can't really connect all that stuff up in your asset management system you created there first. So your editors will still have a job to do in GIS. So if the integration is properly designed, assets can be replaced in the work asset management system. In this case, it's recommended that GIS is linked to both install location and assets, so the asset details can be updated back into GIS appropriately. There'll be times you want to change things out. The work crew goes out, and with their work management mobile application, they replace an item, right, with another item that came out of inventory. And we want to get that stuff back to JS. And when that's what's happening, it should just be kind of attribute flow back to JS. So, it's got a new serial number, it's got a new install date, right, new model number, those types of things. You can do that so that, you don't have to flow that stuff through JS if you properly manage that. So that's the replacement is a little, makes it a little bit easier, but still, a lot of times you're going to do mass creation of records coming from GIS, right? A new subdivision gets added, all that stuff kind of comes in together. It's not coming through inventory. So inventory a lot of times is more of the exception, but you can manage that. But then, for retirement, that would also be done in GIS first. And that also ensures the GIS network is properly maintained, including properly terminating lines as necessary. Something that there might be a work order to do that, but you're not necessarily like capturing the details of the network inside of your asset management system and work management system. So you really want to kind of, the work order's done, but you want to make the record changes inside of GIS to go through the retirement process there that would trigger asset management. My 2 cents, but that comes from a lot of good and bad implementations over the years, right? So that seems to work really well.
That's great. Scott, putting back on your utility side hat, anything you want to add to this question?
I agree with Jeremy. If it's a spatially located asset, Josh, that should be done in the GIS and synchronized back to the corresponding system. That's always been my workflow to whatever utility I've worked for in the past.
Excellent. Switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about design and some integration challenges. I'll let you behind the curtain a little bit on this question. With these questions, I kind of vetted them out with the group, and nobody wanted to take this one. But so Jeremy drew the short straw on this just because of the complexity around electric and the assets. Was really kind of the laugh that we had about it. But Jeremy, if you would talk to us a little bit, I know you've worked on some electric projects here, but talk to us about how that complexity around electric is different and kind of how the assets get modeled consistently across the edge systems based on the complexity there.
One of the things I can say is it's not absolutely not happening one side or the other, but a lot of times our piping collection distribution systems, we don't model a hierarchy as much in the asset management system as we might have in the GIS. Where electric, the hierarchy kind of is important to both sides, right? So electric and communications is very similar, but with the electric, you've got things like support structure, surface structure that then have like transformer banks, and then you've got your individual units underneath those. Right? There's a hierarchy, and you want to maintain that hierarchy between both systems because it's important to both systems from a maintenance standpoint and from a connectivity in your network standpoint. So individual units, right, exist in both systems, like switches, capacitors, fuses, transformers. The GIS requires this information for proper network representation, right, the connectivity. And the EM requires it for maintenance activities. Phase information is typically represented in EM as a characteristic of the unit, bank, etc. And I would recommend that. I know some people want to go a little farther down and somehow, use that as a categorization. It tends to lead to more work than is necessary. So if you have a robust GIS, there's a little reason to categorize an asset in EM by phase. Instead, they'd be categorized by the type of asset. The categorization of EM is typically just again, GIS being the source, it's an asset group of UN or an asset group asset type combination. So for example, underground transformer or overhead transformer, those are good categorizations. They're very different types of things, right? But to get down to the phasing as a categorization of the unit of those units instead of just attribution on those is probably taking it too far, right? It might sound good at one point from a reporting standpoint that you can report on those attributes as well, but then just overall categorize down that far in the EAM, like I said, it just creates a lot more activities that probably necessary.
Awesome. Before I switch to this next question, I'll pull it up and two things. One, just a reminder that you can provide your own questions in the Q&A tab that we talked about at the top. If you're joining late, please feel free to enter your questions there because we're moving closer to the Q&A portion of things, and I'd love to have the team field some of those. But moving to this question, I don't know why I always love to put the pitfall pieces in here, right? The mistakes that happen that the different organizations see in these projects, but it's always a question and an answer that seems informative to the group of what to avoid. So I'd like to ask all three of you to answer this one. And Adam, I'll start with you. Just, what are the common pitfalls you see? What are the mistakes that, the audience, depending on where they're at, need to avoid when they're synchronizing assets, and migrating over to the UN?
There's a couple levels. At the high level, I would say understanding what needs to move when, and understanding that not everything needs to move immediately. You don't need to push everything near real time. There's nothing wrong with certain assets moving overnight, perhaps even once a week, depending on the frequency of change and the volumes. Trying to push everything all the time, every call, can get you into a little bit of trouble. The other thing is making sure that as you're going through your requirements and your design, being able to synchronize is a lot easier when you've made things match, whether it's attributes and characteristics, drop-down values, all these things. Make sure that you have consistency across the two systems, so that as you start to engage in the synchronization process and you're trying to bring attribution across, it's got the proper landing spot and the values match, because that gets you out of having to create lots of different translations and going from codes to descriptions and back and forth. And some of that will, which can actually in high volume environments can actually slow things down a little bit.
Awesome. Scott, tell us your horror stories. Now, what mistakes have you seen that we want to avoid in the category? Oh, Scott, you're on mute. I believe.
I was on mute. I am sorry.
Oh,
So-
don't worry.
So the biggest horror stories that I see, and it's because I'm more on the GIS side, trying to match data up to the EAM side, right? It's that validation. It's knowing that the number of assets that I have in the GIS, and the number of assets that I have in the EAM, and that they match up, and that I have everything that we need. So the GIS system may have been a standalone system in the past, and the EAM system was its own standalone, and nobody realized that it was in sync, or if it wasn't. And all of a sudden you're now putting this all together, and you realize I've got extra assets in GIS, not enough assets in EAM, and trying to work with the field workforce or the right departments to get that corrected data. Josh.
Awesome. Jeremy?
So I've got two. One is handling deletion of records in GIS. Right, it's a foreign concept to a lot of the other systems because you say delete, people get a little nervous. Like, no, we don't delete stuff, right? For referential integrity, makes sense. But in GIS, it has always been that way. It may always be that way, right? That when records go out of service, get dug up, get removed, they get deleted. They might get moved to another feature class, but they're essentially deleted from the layer. The trick there is if it gets deleted, it's hard to detect, right? GIP can do it. And just make sure you've got that deletion. Typically what it just means, it can be a couple things, but at the very least, if GIS is kind of the leading system for those edits, make sure that's changing the status in your asset management system. So it reflects that this thing actually got removed, it got retired, whatever. It could be different statuses for different activities. Sometimes it's moving it to a different location, right? A junk location, scrap location, whatever. But at the very least, the status. So that way you don't end up rolling a truck out to something that appears to be in service, and they get there and they're right. Where is this thing, right? But it could have just been on an inspection plan, right? Like it's on a job route or something, and it just we didn't close the loop. So make sure you handle the deletes. The other one just builds on what the other guy said. It's that alignment, but I think the biggest mistake there is not aligning the downstream systems with the source model, right? That happens all the time. Everybody's got their view of how they want the world. Well, if your world is built from some other source, look at that world first, right? It's going to cause a lot of problems if you don't try to model that and you try to make it your own thing. It just makes everything more challenging. For example, model individual transfer unit locations in the work and asset management system, locations and the assets, right, to facilitate easier automation of unit replacement. So many people just go round and round about why they don't want to do that. Just doesn't. There's no real great argument that I've ever heard. There's just resistance, right? So just kind of give in to that a little bit, be open to it, and you'll see the process is much cleaner if you kind of model from that source system a lot better, and you're just trying to give some feedback like on replacements.
Awesome. Thanks. That's excellent. Thanks, all three good ones. Let's talk about the future a little bit. Maybe Adam, I'll start with you on this one. When should utilities consider an Esri to Esri replication versus an EAM GIS integration?
So different business processes are going to drive the need for this. As we look across the industry and you see things like digital as-building, right, becoming very, very common in the field. Well, depending on how your architecture is set up, you may be bringing that data back in various ways. If you have contractors who are doing your construction, maybe you're bringing that back through AGOL and you need to put that into a staging environment or to a staging database. And at that point, I want to review it there, QA, QC everything, and then actually move it to the main database. That would be an example where I want to have this synchronization moving between those two Esri environments, and I can use GIP and all these tools to move that data very easily. Versus continuing down the as-built track, once I'm actually moved that into production, to the discussion we had earlier where we want our as-built data to land in our GIS first, then it replicates over to our EAM to be set up for maintenance schedules and what have you. So the nice thing is the tools and the platforms that are available today are capable of supporting both. It's just you need to look at your business process and say, okay, when do I want to have this data and why do I want to move it between these systems? And then going back to the same, once again, how often, what am I moving, and how much of that data actually needs to move between those two systems. because not every piece of information needs to be in both all the time.
Awesome. Jeremy, something to add?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. So, I think going along I'll talk to the Esri a little bit. So maintaining a publication geodatabase that's used by the asset management system will make it easier to upgrade systems independently. Being around this long enough, there have been some really good integrations. There are some really good integrations of asset management systems and customer information systems, that integrate with the GIS. But then there are major shifts in GIS, like GN to UN, right? And by upgrading that, if you're kind of tied to it, it really makes the whole thing have to move at once, right? And it makes it just a bigger lift, right? And there are, so the last time I kind of saw something like this was when we went from 9 to 10, RHS 9 to RHS 10. And it wasn't necessarily just a structural change in GIS, but, some systems were built for 9 and weren't ready for 10. It's kind of the same thing that's happening right now. We've got systems that are built for the standard database models. They're not built for the UN and branch versioning and stuff. So give them time to get ready. But if you have that publication database, you can kind of keep your existing model in place, move up to the UN, and backfill that from the UN to the GN, kind of like you talked about early in the process. So that's one of those applications that will continue to integrate there until that system is ready to fully support the UN. And then you can move them independently. Like if we're not ready to move our EAM, fine, right? You've got this geodatabase that still supports it. You'll just have to build that GIS to GIS synchronization. You're moving up to the UN for all of your other stuff. Or vice versa, right? You're moving your EAM up to a new thing, and it's got different needs. You're not hindering one or the other. You're kind of keeping them independent. And then, you got the publication geodatabase. Another reason people like that publication geodatabase is you can do administrative activities on your editing environment by just kicking out your GIS users and not having to worry about all of the integrations that it might interfere with, right? And I think that we see that quite a bit, and it's a convenience that people have appreciated having, that they can do their GIS stuff somewhat independently of those other pieces.
Awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. So I want to touch on a question that we kind of had in the list of challenges earlier. And Scott, maybe I'll start with you here. How do you see, kind of from an integration design perspective, how can we reduce the reliance on these contractors, these custom scripts, kind of approaching integrations in that way? How do we go about that, or how do utilities go about that? Again, putting on your utilities hat a bit.
So in my previous job, I was the GIS supervisor, right? So wasn't on the IT side. I knew the data model. I knew with the systems that we needed to integrate into, Josh. And talking with the developers, it was going to be a lot of time, a lot of development, a lot of back and forth. And I couldn't actually get my hands involved in it. I could give them outlines, I could give them specs, but I couldn't do the day-to-day things that was going to need to be done to configure these configurations. So when we found GeoNexus and we implemented GIP, it was right there in front of you. It's a nice, easy GUI. We set up the connections on both sides. It allowed the GIS department and the IT department to both be involved in that configuration and the understanding of how that data was going to move. It also allowed that once I left, somebody else to come in and easily reverse engineer everything that we put together and understand what was happening. So the reduced cost is that I didn't have to have a contractor, third party come in and constantly update those scripts or change things as we changed requirements in the system. And we were able to do all of that configuration ourselves, Josh.
That's awesome. Yeah. And we see that quite a bit in our day-to-day discussions that folks are coming in, more and more looking for something that doesn't have that reliance on IT as much, or really reduces the burden on IT, right? It's not necessarily taking the job away from them. It's making the low-hanging fruit easy from an integration perspective for someone, even in GIS, to manage through the out-of-the-box tools, and then Also just reducing kind of the need to go into the queue and to give, big work to IT as they have enough on their plate. Which is, is fantastic. And we're happy that we're able to support kind of that use case. All right, I'm going to switch to the Q&A real quick as we're running up against time. And Adam, maybe I'll go to you. I have a question here. We talked about data governance. Who owns data governance across GIS, UN, enterprise systems? And what are you seeing in terms of how CIOs or IT leaders are enforcing this alignment across organizations?
Yeah, so the data governance has become a much more complicated question, I think, in terms of the more integration we have, the more we're pushing towards enterprise data quality. Then the data governance now has to extend out beyond your EAM system or beyond your GIS system. This really has to be looked at now, kind of how we used to sit down and actually build out enterprise data models of here are all the systems involved, here is all the data, here's all the attribution and characteristics and pieces of it. We now need to lay that governance model across that in its entirety. You can no longer really afford to have a roadblock that's going to occur because I'm trying to move and integrate new master data that is coming down either to SAP or Maximo or Oracle or what have you. And then suddenly it's going to get shunted off into the master data group who is now going to put this extended process around it. That sort of blocks a lot of the functionality that we're trying to implement in terms of being able to keep these systems in sync and to keep that data quality high, but move this data quicker, right? I have to move it through those governance models as fast as I can. So as we are, and I think companies are going to struggle with this, especially larger entities where they have had to put very rigid controls around their master data because they have seen over time allowing too many people access to that master data or the ability to make changes to that master data has created problems in the downstream business processes. I think that they are going to have to find a new balancing act between everybody's got their own governance model. Obviously, with the UN coming on top of Esri, they're going to have, it's got its own governance model and rules and things as you're editing in new features and points and lines, what have you. If you go to something like SAP, where you've also got master data management that sits on top of that has its own set of rules and processes and things that are going to check out that. Those two governance models now have to be looked at together and to understand how much impact is this going to have on your business, because you need that data to move as quickly as possible, as accurately as possible, but as quickly as possible as well. So I don't think that right now there is a great, in my opinion, of the organizations I've worked with, I don't think there's a great answer for how we do enterprise data governance across these different government models per system. But through the partnerships and things, I see SAP, Maximo, Oracle, Esri working together to try to understand that. And then you have products like GIP sitting in the middle that are saying, we can help guarantee that data quality because we will help move these things securely. We will move them where you can count on this integration. It's going to fire, have reliability. You know what's going to happen. You know when the data is going to move, and you're going to have the error reporting to see any problems. So I think that's going to change those governance models slightly. Not necessarily on the actual creation of it, but as we looked for updates, retirements, replacements, the things that Jeremy was talking about, that's where those governance models are going to have to adjust a little bit.
So, all right, I'm going to ask you a rapid fire question to the whole group in just a second. I'm going to give it to you now, and then I'll answer another one that came in. So the way I'm going to pose it to you is, give me a one-word answer to describe a successful asset management integration. Okay. But before I do that, I'll let you think about it. One word. I know that's tough. I'm putting you on the spot. There's a question about key resourcing. We get this a lot. Like, who needs to be involved in these projects from an integration perspective? And I'll go ahead and take that. And I think the thing that I see, the place where these projects really can kind of get rewound or move backwards after they've seen some success, they've got some traction, is when IT is not brought to the table early enough, right? And so one of the things I often do in my conversations is, as I start talking to GIS, maybe it's a combination of the GIS team and asset management. I will recommend, hey, we need to bring somebody in from IT, at least to look at, systems and how the software is going to work, one. But, just from a data perspective, having them involved, having the right people that kind of understand schemas, that might be involved in some of that in a different way. I've seen it where when they're not brought in early enough, when they're kind of brought in to bless the decisions that have been made, it can roll projects backwards. And so, that question about what are the key resources that need to be involved in these projects, I think is a really good one. All right. So back to the question for the group. Jeremy, I'll start with you. One word you use to describe a successful asset management integration.
Confidence.
Competence or confidence?
Confidence.
Okay. All right. Adam.
Yes, one word. So that's all I can say.
Transparency.
Okay. All right. And Scott.
Reliability.
All right. Jeremy, why your answer? I'm giving you more than one word now.
Yeah, it's just one of the biggest challenges going into integration is there's probably lack of confidence by different business units in the data that they're looking at, right? So we hear it all the time. It's like, we don't know if we're rolling out there if the information we're seeing is accurate, right? Once you've got a successful integration, there's a lot of parts that go to the successful implementation integration. Is people have daily confidence. They see reports telling them what happened. They're on top of any errors that occurred. And I don't want to go into the next one that Adam's going to talk about, but yeah, just there's a kind of renewed confidence or a new confidence in, hey, everything's just great, right? Everything's working. I know what's going on.
Adam, quickly explain your answer.
Jeremy and I are definitely in the same neighborhood. I think the transparency of being able to audit, having the proactive comprehensive error reporting. Take something like GIP that is going to do a full compare. It's going to show me orphans. It's going to show me problems. It's going to show me, record counts of success. I don't have to guess what data moved when, what didn't work, and what do I need to address. And I think that transparency very quickly builds confidence on both sides, source to target, or if it's bidirectional, for both camps, right? I've got my EAM folks over here, GIS over here, and everybody can sit and look at the same thing and go, I know what moved, I know where it landed, or I know what went wrong.
Okay. Scott, quickly, what's your explanation?
It kind of falls across the other two, Josh. The reliability, knowing that the data that moved from your GIS into your EAM system came across. You got a report that shows all those assets, what succeeded, what updated, what created, what deleted, if anything failed. I'm on the same page as those guys.
Awesome. Nice job. I put you on the spot there. I like that. The one-word answers were great. All right. That'll conclude for us. Really appreciate everybody joining today. If you have any questions, any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. Here's my email. If you're going to be at IMGIS, please reach out. We'd love to talk to you there. And lastly, Jeremy, Adam, Scott, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, to participate in this. I think this is a great amount of really, really good information for the group here. And I really appreciate you taking all the time to be with us today. So thanks.
Absolutely. Our pleasure.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, y'all. Have a great afternoon.